this conversation about financing and the SDGs in Uganda. This is a very timely and pertinent conversation to be had. It's not a time for speeches. It's not a time, as we say in West Africa, for big grammar. It's a time for us to roll up our sleeves and look the proverbial horse in the mouth. There are a number of things that we need to do. By we, I mean this beautiful country of Uganda and its development partners. The number of things we need to do differently between now and 2030 if the SDGs are going to mean anything. And so as we have this conversation today, I'd like us to, for a moment, forget about all the SDGs and CPDs and PIPs and PFPs and think about the end goal. The end goal here is not the conference and the report and the outcomes. The end goal is ensuring that the welfare and the well-being of each and every citizen in this country is affected positively because of what we do here today. That's our end goal. And so, with those brief introductory remarks, I'd just like to say that our regional director, Ms. Ahuna Eziakonwa, sends warm greetings and best wishes for a successful conversation. And she personally renews her commitment to work alongside Uganda and her development partners on this exciting journey. I'd like to start by extending my sincerest appreciation to the government and people of Uganda for such a warm welcome and for making us feel so much at home. These annual conversations around the SDG are an opportunity for us to take stock of progress made over the past years and create and co-create a brighter development future for Uganda. A future in which Uganda's abundant natural resources, Uganda's abundant human resources are used to create the Uganda that the people expect and deserve. When British Prime Minister Winston Churchill famously popularized the phrase, the Pearl of Africa, after his visit to this beautiful country in 1907, he saw the same things that we see today. A country with a vibrant culture, enterprising people, exquisite natural beauty, and boundless potential. Our task as development professionals and friends of Uganda is to work with this great country to build resilience against domestic and external shocks, make strategic investments that lay the foundation for a more sustainable and tech-enabled future, and ensure that no Ugandan or Ugandan community is left behind. Our distinguished guests, aspirational indices like the SDGs are commonly seen as a really good framework and a foundation for this effort. Too often we view the SDGs only in terms of ranking. And while it is really heartening to identify with Uganda's recent progress in moving from 144 to 136 in the global rankings, the SDGs mean much more. They are predicated upon a simple theory of change, which states that when a country makes strategic investments in the 5 Ps, namely people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships, that country could transform society, enhance its economic prospects, strengthen state-society relations, and bolster peace. We're now at the midpoint of the SDGs, as many people have said. Uganda has made some significant progress in this area, particularly goals relating to climate change, responsible consumption, and gender equity. The COVID pandemic reversed some of the gains, but Uganda is bouncing back. However, taking steps to make up for lost ground and accelerate the attainment of the SDGs requires substantial and affordable financial investment. Uganda, like the rest of Africa, struggles to fill the SDG financing gap. By most estimates for Africa, it's about $200 billion annually between now and 2030. These are not expenditures African countries like Uganda can choose to postpone. They are development imperatives that need to be done now. So, this leads me to the fundamental question I'd like to engage each and every one of us with. Where are these additional financial resources going to come from? Let us start by considering domestic sources. We all agree that Uganda has made a lot of progress and taken steps to improve tax efficiency and expand the domestic tax base. The National Domestic Revenue Mobilization Strategy aims to increase revenue as a proportion of GDP to between 16 and 18% by 2024. This is a laudable goal, but there are three problems. First, for this to happen, much more needs to be done to boost tax receipts and maximize the retention of value by moving Uganda away from low-value, semi-processed products to higher-value, tech-enabled commodities. Second, urgent measures must be taken to address Uganda's high debt servicing problems. I listened very keenly to Professor Sachs yesterday, and I do agree with him to some point. Yes, there's a need to borrow, but we have to borrow responsibly with one eye on the debt servicing requirements that causes fiscal stress for so many African countries. This is why countries like Uganda have to be put in the uncomfortable position of deciding whether to repay debt or invest in the SDGs. The third reason why these domestic resources are particularly constrained is because much more needs to be done to improve and expand the tax base itself. So in these areas, clearly, recently there has been some incremental progress, but the reality, and answering the question I just posed, domestic resources alone cannot fill Uganda's SDG financing gap. So what about external resources? Traditional concessional development assistance available for Africa from both bilateral and multilateral sources has been drying up in recent years. It fell to a low of below $40 billion a couple of years ago. In addition, some bilateral partners like China are switching from providing grants and concessional loans to providing commercial loans. These trends have direct implications for SDG financing in Uganda because countries find it difficult to be able to afford the sort of strategic financial investments that they require. This added expense also has direct implications for the debt burden. With the drop in the volume of grants and concessional lending, African countries are now seeking financing from global financial markets. UNDP recently published a study which is titled Lowering the Cost of Borrowing in Africa, the role of credit ratings agencies. And we looked at 16 African countries, and we estimated that African countries lose about, those 16 African countries, not the whole continent, those 16 lose $74 billion because of the extra interest that they have to pay, and also the foregone investment flows into those economies. Compare 74 billion losses with 35 billion in ODA. This is a significant problem because not only is it closing the window for financing, but also increasing the costs. Another dimension of this external financing problem is what I call the mismatch issue. African countries require long-term financing for climate change-related issues, for green transitions, etc. But most of the financing instruments available to them are short-term in nature. They have to repay in 3 to 5 years. But the investments only yield dividend in 7 to 10 years. So there's a problem there as well. And these markets for these financing instruments, particularly Eurobonds, are new for most African countries. So there is not enough data about risk. And so risk seems to be priced at a premium for African countries, making borrowing unusually expensive. Excellencies, distinguished guests, it is clear that enhanced domestic resource mobilization and intensified efforts to secure traditional external financing are not going to cut it for Uganda. Uganda and its development partners must get creative, and they have to be persistent. Options like blended finance, blue and green bonds, diaspora bonds, carbon trading, public-private partnerships, and others may be and probably must be considered if Uganda is going to close its SDG financing gap, particularly the areas that are linked to sustainable investments. But it must be noted that the success and efficacy of these new efforts is contingent upon Uganda's ability to establish and sustain a nurturing policy and regulatory environment. It also depends on Uganda's commitment to providing a climate in which technology and financial innovation thrive. UNDP and the UN family stand ready to support this process in a number of crucial ways, and I'll just mention a few before I close. First, I'd like to mention UNDP's support through its integrated national financing framework here in Uganda. This helps Uganda build SDG-friendly public financial management ecosystems that will underpin efforts to strengthen the management of public resources and enhance the mobilization of additional financing options. Second, I'd like to mention our work with Tax Inspectors Without Borders. This could help Uganda stop some of the illicit financial flows from this country and help repurpose these funds to finance Uganda's SDG aspirations. Globally, this program has clawed back some $2 billion that would have been lost and assessed an additional $4 billion in extra taxes and trained 1,500 financing professionals across the world. It could be a welcome boost for Uganda's domestic resource mobilization efforts. I'd also like to mention the work of our Global Finance Hub, which has worked with countries like Cape Verde, Indonesia, and Timor-Leste to issue thematic bonds like SDG bonds, blue and green bonds, diaspora bonds, which allow countries and their developing partners to finance critical investments related to particular SDGs. Later this year, UNDP would be launching a consortium that will offer advisory services to African countries who are working with credit rating agencies to price the risk appropriately so that when they approach international financial markets, they wouldn't have the credit ratings issues that I mentioned earlier. Through UNDP's Finance Hub in Pretoria, we could provide Uganda with technical support to enhance both public and private finance from domestic and international sources that support the SDGs. UNDP's SDG Financing Academy is also a great asset in this area. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, financing the SDGs in Uganda will be hard work, but our collective effort would make it completely doable. As one most distinguished son of Africa, Nelson Mandela, once said, "It looks impossible until it is done." Uganda can accelerate attainment of the SDGs, but in order to do so, we must get the financing right. Uganda must take some difficult decisions that will pave the way for success, and the development community must stand by to support. Allow me to close by paraphrasing a section of a speech that US President John F. Kennedy gave at Rice University in 1963 when he was trying to justify US expenditure on the space program. And people questioned, how are you going to get the financing right? And I think it's very pertinent in this regard as well. And paraphrasing, I'll say, SDG financing is daunting, but it's achievable. Uganda should choose to succeed in this area, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. And because this goal of attaining the SDGs will serve to organize and measure the very best of Uganda's energies and skills. Because this is one challenge that Uganda is willing to accept and unwilling to postpone. Thank you very much.